Welcome back to Second Breakfast. We're continuing our dive into the world of Arrakis. This entire month has just been taken over by our Dune love. We're blowing through the books. We're blowing through the movies. We're just very excited about everything Frank Herbert has created right now. But I have to tell you, we got there an hour and a half early for this movie on the biggest IMAX screen in Texas.
We sure did. Opening weekend. And it was like a Sunday noon showing.
Sold out.
And it's sold out.
Massive
Amazing.
theater.
Yeah.
Like 5 stories, sold out. So we get there. They let us in the theater an hour and a half early, which is really good. We don't have to...
Really nice. We're like lining up like peasants on the street.
We've been going to this theater for 12 years. And Maggie's old now.
So I'm so old. Ancient.
She can't go crisscross applesauce anymore in the little line outside the theater. That's not an option anymore. So thankfully they let us in the theater. I pull out my Kindle. I start reading the Dune book that I'm on right now. Maggie's reading her own thing. And this guy sits next to us. He gets there 10 minutes before the movie starts. His friends had saved him a seat because it wasn't reserved seats.
Oh, was that guy?
Yeah.
Oh,
adding
that is
to
so
the chaos.
funny.
This guy's showing up to the most anticipated movie of the year.
Getting like the second best seat in the house because we, of course, had the first best one. So he's like right next to Cam. So his friend saved him an amazing seat 10 minutes before the movie starts.
Yeah, and they're just making like normal catch-up conversation. I'm watching the time because I have the clock set on my Kindle. 5 minutes before the movie starts, the guy looks over to his friend in a lull in the conversation and goes, "So I didn't see the first one. Anything I should know?"
Incredible. Just living life on the very edge at all times. I can't imagine his poor friend having to summarize all of Dune 1.
His friend did an incredible job.
Wow.
Giving the guy just a 2-minute crash course through this franchise.
That's pretty incredible.
It was remarkable. But there's me on the other side of him foaming at the mouth. All I've been doing is thinking, talking, sleeping, and breathing Dune for the last 2 weeks.
Like, how do you not know? Amazing. Well, that reminds me, if you have not listened to our other Dune episodes, you probably should. And also, we're going to spoil this movie, right?
Oh, yeah.
We're going to spoil the heck out of this movie. So, spoilers for Dune Part 2. But if you haven't seen it, you got to stop listening right now and go see it.
And we've done episodes on the first Dune movie and the first Dune novel, which is broken into 3 books or 3 sections. We already have episodes up for the first 2 of those. Next Tuesday will be something else, but the week after that will be part 3 of that first book. Week after that, we're talking Dune Messiah, which is the basis for the next Dune movie.
Right.
A lot of stuff going on over here at Second Breakfast in the world of Dune. Let's talk about this movie.
Let's talk about it. Let's start from let's just get it off our chests. We loved this movie, right?
Loved it.
It was great.
Most beautiful thing I've seen in a long time.
It was so great.
I think the direction was a step up from the last movie, which was itself an unbelievable
Pretty
spectacle.
incredible. Yeah.
A dazzling film.
If I had just watched this movie with the sound off, I would have had a fantastic time. And then, of course, you add in the amazing score, the amazing sound design, and the amazing dialogue and writing and storytelling. It's just a feast. It was a wonderful movie.
Fantastic. And you are big into Greg Fraser. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I think he's the director of photography or cinematographer. I should have known.
Aren't those the same thing?
They're definitely not.
I know they're not. Film bros in the comments, tell me the difference because I'm not going to look it up.
We're doing the podcast.
By definition, I can't be a film bro. I'm but a girl. So somebody tell me the difference.
He's the guy who shot the Robert Pattinson Batman movie a couple years ago, which we also loved.
And saw in IMAX,
Same
I believe.
Theater.
At that same
Probably
theater.
the same seats.
Probably, yeah. Amazing.
Anyway, that movie was incredible looking.
Yes.
And this is somehow even better.
Yeah.
So, stunning movie. The rest of our conversation is going to be maybe less glowing than that.
I was going to say, here's the thing.
So,
I loved this movie. Sorry, but I think we both kind of came away and were like, I think we liked the first one better.
I had no idea how I was glowing from the images.
Right,
and
just
we'll
the
talk
experience
about that.
was amazing.
Because
right.
it's stunning. It's almost overwhelming.
Oh, yeah.
I think maybe you had that.
I was
feeling?
getting a little bit of sensory overload, which doesn't really happen to me much in movies. It happens to me in other parts of my life, but it doesn't really happen to me in movies usually. Usually I'm like all in. I'm like, yes, I want to be bombarded with sound and color and light and images and amazing things. But I was a little overwhelmed. It was quite a lot. And it was IMAX, so, but it was a lot.
And most of the movie literally was the full aspect ratio.
I would say
IMAX.
at least half of the movie. I mean, that could be totally wrong. My perception is that it was at least half, was that full range.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah.
So I couldn't figure out what I thought about this movie until I started doing my notes. So the first point I want to open with, if you'll give me a little runway here, the lead that I didn't want to bury here is, why didn't this movie make me feel what the book did?
Okay.
or at least not to that extent. And I think maybe the best place to start is the supporting cast, because I really preferred the spotlight supporting cast of part 1. And there are a lot of characters you could talk about in that realm, but just to focus it down to 2, it's Duncan Idaho and Leto. Or Leto, depending on the character, apparently.
Yeah,
There's
it
no
just
consistency
changes
there.
throughout. The Duke.
Duncan
Chalamet's father.
and Oscar Isaac.
Yeah,
I really love those characters.
They were so good. It was so sad that they died.
Both got nuked. Together, they maybe had 10 minutes of screen time.
I
But
know, yeah.
I thought they were, especially on a rewatch a week ago when we watched part 1 again, I thought those two were the heart of that movie.
Right. They really carry the movie in such a special way.
And as dazzling and action-packed and exciting and sweeping as part 2 is, the thing that I'm really settling on is that it didn't have that heart for me.
Right. And it's not like I'm upset that those characters die. That's part of the story. That's like an essential, especially like Leto dying. It's an essential part of Paul's story. But it's frustrating that the other supporting characters here don't seem to be as... it's not that they weren't memorable. They didn't hit as hard.
They didn't hit as hard. Exactly.
These guys did.
So you don't have people like Duncan and Leto to look to for that special sauce, that's giving the movie that excitement and investment.
Yeah.
So without them on the screen, I'm, how hostile I am to any new characters. I've always been like
people?
that.
Yeah.
So I'm looking especially to our returning characters. And I think that's really where like the problem started setting in for me. Because the returning characters, I didn't like the way they evolved here. And some of that is book related, but some of that is just movie related.
Okay, so like who?
I adore Rebecca Ferguson's Lady Jessica.
Oh yeah,
I think
fantastic.
it's the most interesting, complex character. She becomes this like mustache twirling schemer in this movie, and that was fun to watch. But I missed some of the uncertainty of her character in part 1. I missed some of that. The complications in her relationship with Paul, the the grief relative to Leto's death.
Yeah, sure.
I think there was that heart to her character, where the complexity of her character in part 2 is about the schemes and about the gulf between the Bene Gesserit and the prophecies and the religions that they're sowing on this world. That's kind of the conflict with Paul. But none of that it didn't feel as based in emotion as the inner conflicts did in the first part.
Well, it's interesting that you're calling it complexity, because I really, honestly, what I struggled with Lady Jessica in part 2 was a lack of complexity. I felt like her transition from this like woman who's grappling with like this like push-pull between wanting to like take care of her and protect her son and like the legacy of her not husband but the father of her child, and and her family and stuff, and just her own personal safety, while also trying to deal with this religious zealousy that she has, and this like devotion she has to this like almost cult, this order.
If you believe she has any religious belief.
Does she even? Right. So like that was all very complicated in part 1. And here it was like all of a sudden, to me, it felt very sudden. It was like she was trying to protect Paul. Then all of a sudden she was like, what if I became the Reverend Mother? And then she just did that. And it was really cool to watch. And like once she was in that new position and like had taken on this new interest, and I say interest like it was a new hobby, but like this new almost identity, truly an identity, and this new just focus and direction, that was really cool to see, and she did it well. But I had a hard time believing that she had gotten there, and I wanted to see more of that transition. And I understand in a 2.5 hour movie you're trying to cover a lot of ground in this huge sweeping epic, and you're really trying to like there's a lot to cover. And you even said, Cam, that you felt like actually we saw plenty of her, or more than you thought we were going to see.
Yeah, she was still a lead character, and to the movie's credit, I loved the way they really firmly, explicitly told you she has no choice in this becoming a Reverend Mother.
That's
Basically,
true.
the Fremen are going to kill her if she doesn't do that. I liked
That's
that
true.
part, and I liked the transformation, but I think after she drinks the water of life and she becomes a Reverend Mother, her being inheriting all of the memories and like literally like life experience of all of the other Reverend Mothers, never mind the weirdo relationship she's got with the baby inside her, Aaliyah.
Yeah.
I thought that was all the stuff I wanted to see from the character, and I thought that really took a backseat to just kind of the headline of the Bene Gesserit have established the Muad'Dib prophecy on Arrakis, and she's in charge of that, and she needs to sow the seeds of that through the people.
Yeah, I think I wanted to see more of that struggle, that internal struggle of hers, because to me it felt very much like, oh, Lady Jessica bad now. Like that's kind of how it read to me. You're right.
Sure.
Like, it's a good reminder that she was kind of forced. Like she didn't just choose to do this; she was forced to do this. But then, if it was not her choice, she should have then struggled a bit with what was going on. I mean, I know that drinking the water of life changes you, like that's kind of the whole thing, but I don't know, I had a little bit of a tough time. Also, by the way, Lois Lowry, author of The Giver, I for my entire life thought, oh, what a unique concept. Lo and behold, Frank Herbert did it before Lois Lowry. Anyway, if you read The Giver in 8th grade, leave a comment below.
But Lady Jessica shouldn't feel like the other Reverend Mother, the main one. The main old lady.
The main old lady, yeah. Who gives Paul the test in part 1.
Right,
yeah.
because they're all mad at Jessica because she strayed from the plan by having a son.
Yes.
So she's broken with the Bene Gesserit. She does her own bad stuff, and she's culpable for all sorts of war crimes and things later.
Right.
But she shouldn't feel as simple and amoral player as the other Reverend Mothers, and I think she kind of did here. I like your point about her feeling more simple than you wanted. I think that was and again, I only got this from like hammering at these notes yesterday. I think simplification is the thing that bugged me about how they characterized Stilgar here.
Oh yeah, he was very one note. I mean, Javier Bardem was great, and his lines were actually so funny. Like his performance got a lot of laughs. Not like they were laughing at his performance, but like his religious devotion is played in this like absurd way, so it felt very funny to the audience, which I thought was good, but it did get a little old.
So, I mean, I enjoyed all those lines, and the whole IMAX was laughing at that.
Yeah, and I've seen so many great memes online.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
and I love the critique about fundamentalism. I think that is the other shoe dropping from the Bene Gesserit plotline. I think you need to play those as a symphony for it to work at all. But I really liked the version of Stilgar, which is the book version of Stilgar, that they had established at the end of the first movie, which is him being this sort of gruff authority figure, him having that avuncular, withholding approval relationship with Paul.
Sure.
And I felt that for like 2 scenes of this movie.
Yeah, I feel like he relinquished it a little too fast.
Stilgar should have, especially when he is the sole character embodying religious devotion and eventually the blind faith in the Messiah. That should be the scariest part of the movie. And in Dune Part 2, it's the funniest part of the movie.
Yeah, that's true. It should be it because I think what that does is his performance and like the way he's characterized, that being so like comical, removes a lot of the power, I think, of what's happening with Paul. Not necessarily the power. It removes like the potency and the danger of it. It makes what he's doing feel like it's silly and like absurd and like almost frivolous and not like incredibly dangerous. I mean,
yes,
they're certainly not like downplaying the danger of what Paul becomes. Like I didn't leave the movie feeling that, but I should have been more afraid of the people who are revering him and praying to him. And
the zealotry should be terrifying. I mean, the way the movie, and I understand that this is Warner Brothers and this is a mainstream. Almost, you have to like domesticate sort of some of the critiques that Frank Herbert is making to make this a mainstream tentpole blockbuster movie for like American and international audiences. And I know that's why they're making some of these changes, like not referring to the coming holy war as the jihad.
Yeah,
which,
you can't do
like
that.
I know the book was written in 1965, but the associations with that term in an American context now in the 21st century makes that storyline different.
Of course it does, yeah.
And calling that just a holy war or calling that just a crusade, I feel like that takes the edge off a little bit of what is happening. And I sensed some of that as well with the characterization of Stilgar, in that I didn't feel scared by him. I was laughing at all of the Lisan al-Gaib, those little moments of him looking
as
odd.
is written,
But those should be dreadful. You should have a feeling of mounting dread as you pass all those checkpoints through the movie, as Paul recedes and this Messiah arises in his place. That like magic trick of not knowing when the one character disappears and the tyrant takes his place.
Right.
Stilgar should be sort of an accessory to that. And I felt like he was a punchline.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like the only reason we were able to see the danger of what was happening was just because of how other characters were reacting to Stilgar, and not from the way, like, and not our own reactions to him. So like the way that Chani was acting, or really the way Paul is acting, and then the way Chani is reacting to how Paul is acting. That helps you understand, oh yeah, this is really bad and dangerous. But like, it's like we have to be told that in order to get that from what his character is doing. And I wish that I had been able to make that, make those determinations and interpretations without the help of other characters' reactions.
2 more examples of characters that I think were oversimplified in their return here. Gurney. You know how I feel about Josh Brolin.
You love Josh Brolin.
Big fan. And I love Gurney Halleck as a character.
Yeah,
and I
great.
know that Josh Brolin took that role incredibly seriously.
Yeah.
Minor spoiler from the book, okay?
Okay.
When Gurney Halleck is, like, cast off into the wind after the Harkonnen raid in part 1.
Yes.
And he takes up with the scavengers.
Mm-hmm.
He, like, trying to do the math and put together what happened in his head, he comes to believe that Lady Jessica turned on the family.
Oh, yeah, because someone had to have turned, yeah.
And that she's a Harkonnen spy. He doesn't know about Dr. Yue. He believes it's Lady Jessica.
Okay, yeah.
So he hates her. So when he meets up with Paul again, and when they have their little meet cute in the desert, he comes back to camp, and he tries to kill Lady Jessica.
Wow.
He, like,
okay.
holds a knife to her throat, and Paul has to
Yeah.
talk him down.
Okay.
And that speaks to that tragic, heartbroken, like, white-knuckle loyalty he has to this life that has died.
Yeah.
Meaning Leto and the life they
House
had.
Atreides, yeah.
Yeah, Caladan, and when they settled here on Arrakis.
Yeah.
And I think that makes his later, once he finds his place in Paul's new, regime and world here, that gives it some texture.
Yeah, definitely.
Because he came in guns loaded.
Right, yeah. And it shows his devotion. It's not just like, oh, I care about you as a person the way that they did in the movie. It's like, I will, take down anybody who has betrayed you. Yeah, I get why they cut that for the movie, just for time and just to make things cleaner, but that is too bad.
But also it's that he'll take down anyone who betrays what the Atreides stood for. And if you'd included that scene, maybe that would have given him some friction with Paul when Paul betrays everything the Atreides stood for.
I did find it was a little strange that Gurney just goes right along with everything Paul's doing and doesn't seem to question any of it. I mean, maybe it's because he's has this undying loyalty for him.
To the father.
But yeah,
I mean, there's a great affection, I think, for Paul. And I'm not saying, I've read the book. He doesn't become an antagonist for Paul.
Yeah.
But there is that texture. In the same way, Stilgar is one of the long-standing, like, lieutenants for Paul. Mm-hmm. But there's always something there. There's principle between them. Yes, he believes in the prophecies and things, but he's also incredibly strict about the Fremen traditions. He's not this unflinching blind faith lieutenant. So I think there's a reduction of texture for Gurney, for Stilgar, like you said, for Lady Jessica. The last character I wanted to throw there is the Baron.
Okay.
You know how much I love Stellan Skarsgård?
Oh yeah, he was great.
And I think him as Baron Harkonnen in the first movie, incredible performance as the villain.
Absolutely.
Some of the most stunning images of that movie are just him floating around. They're just
or in
incredible.
that weird pool of oil. Yeah.
And obviously he sort of has to make room here and seed ground for the Emperor and Fade and a couple other characters who become primary antagonists, I guess, relative to Paul.
Right.
But he was so pushed to the side here. He was barely in the movie. And knowing what happens in the book, they took efforts to extract him from the plots he orchestrates.
Oh, that's frustrating.
He felt quite uninvolved and powerless here.
Yeah, I feel like all he was kind of doing was telling one nephew to do something, and then the nephew failed, so then he got his other nephew to do it. And that's kind of it.
There's a line in the first Star Wars movie, which is, of course, the fourth one, Phantom Menace, the first prequel.
Okay.
Where
Episode 1.
Liam Neeson, they're in a dumb ship, and I had a bath toy of it. It was awesome. It was very cool. And they're in a ship, and it's underwater, and there are a bunch of fish. And the thing is, they keep getting chased by a fish, and then a much bigger, scarier fish will come and eat that fish, and it keeps going and going, and it becomes a lesson.
Yeah.
And he says, "There's always a bigger fish." Mm-hmm. That's how I feel, sort of, about how Frank Herbert tells this story. In that, when you think you have a protagonist, another one will come along. When you think you have a main antagonist, there will always be more on the horizon. So I'm okay if there are going to be big bads that supplant Baron Harkonnen. That's not my complaint.
Yeah.
but it didn't feel like we got a bigger bad than the Baron.
Yeah, I feel like we got some like little sidekicks for the Baron.
We got lesser versions. We got multiple lesser versions instead of the one cool guy.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because the Emperor was so flat. I mean,
no, we'll get to him.
I mean, Christopher Walken is, Christopher
great.
Walken, but the Emperor was doing absolutely nothing.
He was better in Sleepy Hollow.
Right. Oh, he was fantastic in Sleepy Hollow. Can we should do an episode about Sleepy Hollow. Anyway, and then, like the Fade Routha.
Yeah.
He was an interesting character. He was fine. He was cool and creepy and weird and like scary, but yeah, he wasn't a good like replacement for the Baron. There was no good replacement, and yet he was somehow replaced. It was a little strange.
If I can try to balance the scales a little bit here, two counterexamples, two characters who I think improved in their returning roles.
Okay, yeah.
Raban, who's Dave Bautista, the Beast Raban.
Oh yeah, that's the other nephew.
The guy who yells a lot.
I can never remember his name.
Yeah, nephew, lots of weird like veins and divots on his head.
Bald.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, they're all bald. Harkonnens, but yeah, he's the big Harkonnen who gets the sort of stewardship of Arrakis.
Yes.
I thought he was fantastic.
Yeah, he was better in this one, than the first one. He just had more to do, and he was really fantastic.
But they still gave him texture because he is intimidating and scary, and they let him uncork more than once.
That was a lot of fun.
But the frustration that came through in that high-octane performance, that he's in middle management, that he's going to be replaced by Fade, that's the bigger fish thing I'm talking about.
Right,
I got that from Baron, from Raban to Fade. I didn't get that from Baron to the Emperor.
I agree. Yeah. With him, it was like you could see his desperation and his panic in the decisions he's making and the people he kills and the things that he orders to happen. That like fear and panic. It's cool when you see a villain, especially a big, intimidating, powerful villain, start to kind of flounder, because then you just think of, okay, well, what's the even bigger fish than this guy? So that was great.
The way he flamed out and died was operatic on a scale that I will compare to the first movie, which, spoiler alert, I think is a better movie.
Yeah.
But the other character I wanted to talk about was that original Reverend Mother, whose name is, I didn't write it down, but it's like Gaius something. It's
the
not
scary
Helen,
old lady.
But my brain's telling me it's Helen.
Okay.
Anyway, I thought I liked her evolution here too.
She's good.
I liked seeing her pop up with the Emperor. I liked the discussions Arulin had with her and getting more of her perspective. I liked when Paul shot her down. I think there was it felt like a full, what am I looking for?
Character arc?
I guess.
Yeah.
Full circle moment.
Oh,
That's
full circle.
what I'm looking
Okay.
for.
Yes.
But let me talk about this a little more, because I think my main idea here, talking about the supporting cast thing, this rendition of this story, being Denis Villeneuve's duology so far, I hope he does Messiah. I'm sure he will.
Yeah.
But this rendition so far, for me, has resisted Frank Herbert's, what I want to call, revolving door characterization. This is what I was trying to get at earlier.
Okay.
It's resisting that structure. It's not a trope, but it's certainly a narrative tool. And it resists that revolving door characterization while also refusing to introduce some of the new protagonists in this story. And I won't spoil that, but you get it from what I just said.
Okay, yeah. That's an interesting choice. Yeah.
So if you're not doing this revolving door thing, which requires killing off old people and introducing new people.
Yes.
And it is this constant system of demotions and promotions. If you screw up that balance, the demotions of the returning characters feel like failures of the writing and the plotting, instead of a natural ebb and flow of what is ultimately a sprawling history of this planet.
Yeah, if you don't have something to replace the person who's fading away, then it just feels like, well, what happened to that character? That was weird.
Why are we holding on to these characters so tight if we're not doing that much with them? It made this adaptation almost feel too precious, or like I said before, kind of domesticated. And the other side of that coin is that the new characters we did get, who did get narrative prominence here, they only contribute to that feeling of diminishing returns, because Fade feels like a lesser version of Baron Harkonnen.
Yeah.
Margot Fenring feels like a lesser version of Lady Jessica. And the Emperor feels like a lesser version of anyone.
And Princess Arulin, she just kind of feels like, oh, it's a way to create a love triangle. Like, I know that she's serving a much larger purpose than that, and I don't mean to like insinuate that that's all she is, but that's, in her role in this movie, that's kind of all it felt like, and that was really annoying.
I thought she was good, but yes,
most of Florence Pugh's great, but like she's not doing much.
She's great in Messiah, and I think they teed that up. But
Yeah.
again, they're introducing, okay, revolving door will continue. She's going to be the big cheese in the next movie.
Yeah.
That I was okay with. But the Emperor, for having such a build-up, and I like Christopher Walken, and I like the character in the book, and it's not like the character in the book has 50 monologues or anything.
For sure.
But this... I mean, the character, he felt like he barely had a pulse here. Never
I
mind
know.
an agenda of his own.
I mean, he felt so teased in the first movie of like,
Of
ooh,
course.
like this emperor who we haven't even seen. We don't know who he is. He must be this like really imposing, amazing, interesting, terrifying presence. And it was just Christopher Walken.
It was just Nana doddering around in the back.
Yeah,
he was confused. He was impotent. He
Yeah.
He wasn't a tactician. In no sense could he compete with Paul.
Yeah, it really was. It felt like such an easy defeat when Paul takes over. It was strange.
I don't know. I really don't know what happened with the Baron there. I liked Derulin, but again, some of the notable spoiler character omissions here would have continued that tradition of the revolving door and would have helped to keep innovating and evolving this world, because that's what felt so magical about the previous movie.
Yeah.
Was how much it shifted and changed. And obviously there's the magic of the first installment introducing so much of this world.
Of course, yeah.
But those are the two main driving factors in Frank Herbert's storytelling from what I've seen so far. I'm halfway through the third book.
Okay.
The weird and the new. Relentlessly. Every page is weirder and has more new stuff.
Okay.
From concepts to characters. That feels like Frank Herbert's primary delight in storytelling.
Yeah.
And I'm worried that if you kneecap that tendency, which is so core to this story, then things are just kind of trail off as we get farther in here.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's bounce that out with some positivity.
I was gonna say,
because
like,
we did
love this movie. Like, I think it's really important to say we're being very like picky and critical, but
if characters and writing are picky. But yeah,
Well,
let's
sure.
talk about the images.
Yeah.
Because we almost need to divide Villeneuve in half. The left side of him did the directing, the right side did the writing.
yeah, sure.
Let's talk about the directing for a
Okay,
minute.
let's do
The
it.
images. I think this is, and we've been going to movies at this 5-story IMAX for 12 years.
Yeah, for 12 years. Yeah.
All of the big movies in that time, basically, unless I was in New York or something. We've seen all the big ones here.
Sure. Yeah.
This has got to be the most memorable, inventive, dazzling movie I've seen in a big format.
1,000%. It was really, really incredible. I mean, like every, I don't know, 2 minutes, we'd just look over at each other and go, "Whoa!" Like it was so
smiling.
fun. Yes.
I don't usually smile at like, oh, they have hover boots, but it's so cool.
The Harkonnens,
The
like
boots.
jumping up and like floating in the air. I was like, we're all like, whoa! It was so cool.
The sense of scale.
And
in
the
this movie is
colors and
yes.
just like the colors were so incredible, and they were also in the first one, which remember we re-saw in IMAX a few weeks ago, like
this IMAX
at the same theater. Like we had just seen it. Like that movie's really fantastic, but I don't know, maybe it's because the world expanded in this one or what, but there's because I mean Paul's deeper in the desert, there's that, but just it was so like sweeping and grand, and just it was indulging in all the things that I think all film should indulge in. It was just very gorgeous and large scale and in your face, but not like in an obnoxious way, just in a really beautifully, masterfully done way.
Yeah, just powerfully driven and creative. There's a sense of inspiration in every shot. I mean, the composition of the shots, the costumes, and the variety of costumes. Lady Jessica alone had 200 outfits
The
here.
costumes in these movies are pretty fantastic. They are so cool.
The hair and makeup?
I know. It's all really, really well done.
The worms, Maggie.
I was going to
The
say, can we
worms.
talk about the worm scene? So we got to actually see this scene when we saw they did a re-release of the first part in IMAX. At the end, they're like, stick around for the end. There's a little sneak peek of Dune Part 2. So we're like, great, we'll stick around. And it was the scene where Paul rides the sandworm. It was out of context. We didn't see anything else, but we just saw like 8-minute scene where Paul rides this worm. So we had already seen it. And at first I was like, was that kind of like, not a spoiler, but like, at first I kind of was like, maybe I wish I had seen that in situ, like
did it ruin it?
in context, right? And no, it didn't, because it was even better it was as good, if not better, the second time, because you had it in the context of the whole movie, and just I got to like see it in like again, like you notice things that you didn't notice the second time. It was so cool to watch. I like how slow it was. Like, it didn't need to be that long, but I think it did because it's such a big moment. And I loved the build up to it, and just
it's pivotal.
And it's like there's like this wonderful contrast in the sound. Like, it's so quiet at the beginning because they're all watching Paul. He's like, and him just kind of like breathing and saying like okay to himself over and over again, the way that a real nervous 20-year-old would. And then obviously the bombastic crazy sound when the worm arrives and when he jumps on. It was pretty fantastic to see.
And then I think that pays off later when you have the heavy breathing and the lack of music during the duel with Feyd-Rautha.
Yes,
so like
absolutely.
The worm scene, even though it is longer, it's fulfilling his immersion into the Fremen, and it's setting up things later. So like it's incredibly efficient while being gorgeous and immersive and stunning as a set piece. Like it's an incredibly smartly crafted movie. Like they're doing so much right here.
I like you connecting it to the Feyd-Rautha fight. That's really interesting because in the sandworm scene, he like almost falls off. Like, he really struggles to get himself situated on there. Like, he jumps on, he grabs on, and it's like very chaotic and confusing, and he feels completely swallowed by this whole thing, as you would. And he really struggles for a good few minutes to like get the grips in the right spot and to stand up. And it's like that with Feyd-Rautha when like he is stabbed by him and he almost dies and he almost loses. Yeah. Like it's not just like, I'm Paul, I'm the Messiah, I'm, Muad'Dib, I can kill you, boom, boom, done. It's actually quite a struggle. And it's, the Feyd-Rautha and the Sandworm are both like really formidable villains for him to fight against. So I liked that.
And both scenes have so much going on, character-wise, plot-wise, but they're also just incredible to look at. Also,
everybody's watching. Like,
sure.
Nobody's interfering,
yes,
and everybody's watching. And like, but then of course there's a contrast between Chani, especially like being excited for Paul and, and worried that he's not going to do well. And then he does it and she's so proud of him and excited in the sandworm. And then her being incredibly like afraid for Paul's life, but also very disappointed and afraid of what Paul is becoming.
And it's interesting because the sandworm moment feels like a fantasy moment. It feels like the moment where the hero rides the dragon or tames the dragon. And then the duel at the end. I mean, every good Star Wars movie ends with a lightsaber duel. So
yeah, of course, you gotta have a duel.
We've seen that before.
Yeah.
But I think the greatest compliment to like the production team here, the design team, is the barrage of shocking new ideas we see throughout this movie. It feels like in real time they're reinventing so much of what is established science fiction on screen. From like the cool helmets of the random character has 3 lines of dialogue, the way the ships look, the way the guns look, the sights on the guns. Do you remember when the guns were following Chani and Paul as they were running between the legs of the spice harvester
thing? Yeah.
The way it did that like burst fire,
where
it kind of like shotgunned all those bullets out, and the way it sounded, I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, or even the way that the gun that they had, where it was like a big gun, and then
the
like
rocket launcher with the little flaring things in the back.
And then Paul had to load it for her. I really liked that. I'd never seen anything like that before. That
all
was
the
cool.
weird Harkonnen dudes like gathered around the table with the hologram map.
Yeah.
The floaty Harkonnen boots in the beginning, like these were all revelations. Like we're smiling, we're giggling almost to each other. Like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And it's boots. It's people moving somewhere. It's people at a table.
And if y'all have listened to our show before, I do not really like sci-fi. I'm very uninterested and usually bored by technology. And, I've said I like stories that go shing shing and not pew pew. Like, I like swords. I don't like guns. But somehow they made all of this really, really interesting and so cool to look at compared to a lot of other like, spaceship movies that's just like, oh, it's another space blaster gun that goes pew pew, and it's not interesting at all. This somehow, I can't really articulate what made it cool, but it was really, really cool.
And again, to the point of balance, they didn't get carried away by just reinventing the wheel of cool sci-fi gadgets and things.
Right.
Most of the shots, I know this because I make the YouTube videos and the infographics and stuff, finding the images that are running in the background on the YouTube version of this episode, almost every shot that I could find online, the majority of like, oh yeah, I remember that, the beautiful, really stick with you shots are just close-ups of people's faces. They're solo shots of people's faces with pretty colors in the background. even though the film is so gorgeous and startling in the sense of scale, it really does center the character work.
It does.
And accent it with the coolest stuff you've ever seen.
You're so right. As expansive and inventive and visionary as the world is, it is such a character-focused story. And I'm pretty amazed at that balance that it's able to strike.
Next thing I want to play with is an idea we've been talking about for the last few months. I'm finding this just a fixation I've had as we talk about and analyze different works of art that have spoken to us lately. It's some color theory, and I've got some questions buried in here for you.
Okay.
The Black Sun on Getty Prime,
That was
which
cool.
is like the Harkonnen homeworld.
Yeah, the black and white part.
Yeah, exactly. The
Yeah.
like Colosseum duel fights.
Yeah.
That's not in the book, but it's super cool, and I'm glad that was here.
Looked great.
Awesome.
Loved it. Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk about that, the color coding that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember, I think we talked about this in a previous episode. I saw online someone say they appreciated how the first movie felt like it was divided into chapters by the prominent color
Yeah.
in those scenes. And I thought that was, I was thinking of that as I was watching this movie, because it's 2 hours and 49 minutes long. There's a lot of time to think about stuff. The Harkonnens as a whole are sort of color-coded as black and white,
Of
obviously.
course, certainly.
Their skin is like...
Very,
it
very
looks
pale.
bleached white.
Yeah.
And all of their clothes are this like strict black. And obviously that isn't a shorthand for the ethics system of the world. This is not a world of like simplistic black and white morality systems at all. But the Harkonnens are fairly simple characters in that they are pure self-interest.
Yes, sure. Mm-hmm.
To the point of betraying anyone and everyone. There's the reason Josh Brolin, and it's my favorite line delivery in any movie, is the way he says the word brutal in the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I view that as the brutality of almost ultimate self-interest.
Yeah, sure.
So I think of the Harkonnens in that way. It's not black and white morality, but I think of them as being black and white in this sort of, this binary, this brutality.
Right. It's pretty like definitive. Like
Exactly.
there's not a lot of nuance there. Yeah.
And by contrast, we have the Fremen,
Right.
who think about the collective.
Yeah.
The way they talk about the water of the dead belonging to the whole tribe, that it belongs to the people.
Yeah, there's a whole like sense of like there's like a real significance placed on equality amongst everybody. Yeah.
Right. So very stark difference from the embodiment of self-interest. Right. A huge difference. And I think color coding that difference, you have the Fremen clothing, which isn't the harsh blacks of the Harkonnen clothing. Instead, you have the reds and the browns.
Yeah, it's 1,000 shades of red and brown and beige and tan. Yeah.
And I like that almost in the locations or the set pieces we get in this movie, you almost see like the North and South Pole of those ideologies. You get to go to Getty Prime and see a world that is literally black and white.
Yeah.
And then the opening of the movie is this pure, like sun-soaked orange in the sand. And that is them navigating Arrakis and surviving in a way that only the Fremen can.
Yeah.
So I like that we got to see these two extremes, and then through the rest of the movie sort of cross-pollinate them and manipulate them and deceive them until we're not really sure what we're left with.
Right, I like that.
And as Paul starts to shift and
I was
sort
going to
of
say, I mean, by
take
the
his
end,
own place,
he's wearing like a black cloak at the end, right?
well, this is the thing, because eventually he drinks the water of life, and towards the end of the movie, he's still wearing Fremen clothes and the still suit, but he's added in these darker accents. He's almost got this black sash that he's wearing, and there are elements of that sneaking in. And he's, in this movie, at the same time, he is accepted as one of the Fremen, and he finds out, and they delayed this reveal from where it should have been in part 1, he finds out that he's a Harkonnen.
Yes, right.
So he goes to both the North and the South Pole at the same time, and then sort of becomes his own. I thought it was gorgeous how they set that up.
I like that.
And then sent him to both places, and then he made his own thing.
Because he also like literally, are you saying like he literally goes from the north to the
Yes.
south also? Okay, yeah.
That too.
Yeah, so that's also very nice. And interestingly, you know, in the book, I know that he spends about 2 years with the Fremen before like things start to move forward.
2-year time jump, yep.
So, and it's not really clear how much time has happened in this movie. I mean, it's less than 9 months because Jessica hasn't given birth yet.
There's basically no time. Yeah.
But I mean, you get the sense that he's been there for a while. I mean, I'm just thinking about how pale Timothée Chalamet is.
But at the end of the movie, she still hasn't had the baby.
No, I know, but I'm saying, listen, Timothée Chalamet is incredibly pale. if he's
That's contractual.
if he's been on Arrakis for weeks, months,
Yeah.
a man's gonna have a sunburn. Do you know what I'm saying? Like he should have like, if he were truly becoming part of one of the Fremen, I feel like he would have like tanned up a bit, and just like part of that coloring would have changed in him. But the fact that he remains so pale,
He's
I
wearing
think
a still suit and a hood.
I'm just saying.
He's wearing ski goggles riding worms,
I'm
Maggie.
supporting your point. I'm saying the fact that he has stayed so pale, I think is like maybe another like clue about his Harkonnen ancestry.
That's interesting.
That's all I'm saying. I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously he's not going to change races or anything, but it's interesting that he stays so pale after being on the desert planet for months.
Maybe the question I wanted to throw to you is, by the end of the movie, what do you think Paul has turned into? Do you think he is a zealous Fremen fundamentalist? Do you think he is a Harkonnen embodiment of self-interest? Is he some new kind of evil? Like, what was your interpretation of that?
Well, the thing about the Harkonnen brand of evil is that they know what they are doing. They know, like, they're not under any illusion that they're doing the right thing or that they're making a choice that benefits anybody else. They are purely self-motivated, and they know that about themselves. And so that's sort of their brand of evil versus what Paul is doing, which is where he is trying, like, you see him struggle throughout the whole movie. He wants to do the right thing. He is worried about this prophecy of if he travels, I keep getting them mixed up, I think north. If he goes the other way, south, if he goes south, bad things are going to happen. People are going to starve. It's going to be his fault.
It's like a condition of the prophecy he's trying to avoid fulfilling.
Right. He's trying to avoid that. But then, of course, he sort of logics his way into, I have to go there. And so he makes it happen. And I think one of the scariest types of evil is somebody who really thinks they're doing the right thing, but is actually not. Like they have convinced themselves and have rationalized it to themselves to think that they're doing the right thing. Like even like the way that Paul, I think you see that really clearly like lay out with his and Chani's relationship, because you know, they talk about, he reassures her, I'm not seeking power. I don't want to be that. I don't want to cause all this destruction. And then of course he changes his mind about things, but he still tries to justify it to Chani and says like, I want you to know I'm always going to love you, and then turns right around and says he's going to marry Princess Arulin because he thinks, or in his mind it is, or he's convinced himself that it is the right thing to do, and that is like the greater good decision. But and so it's like, it's scary because Chani can see that he's so wrong, and she can see that like he's absolutely making the wrong decision, and she's also taking a little bit personally because
Sure.
as one does. But like you can just see him like sort of deluding himself in real time, and it's so not working. And that's I'm not going to say like which evil is worse, but it's scary when somebody thinks they really are doing the right thing and they...
You think he is then? In the last scene of the movie, you think he thinks he's doing the right thing?
Yes, even if he thinks that he's like pretending to be this Messiah figure, if he's pretending to be seeking power in order to gain control and save people, like he could be even deluding himself into thinking, oh, I know I'm not actually the Muad'Dib or the Lisan al-Gaib or whatever other name they've given me. I know that that's not actually who I am, but I have to pretend in order to save people and like keep the right people in charge. I think he's sort of like thinking that to himself, but I think it's going to end up just congealing in a really bad way.
I wasn't expecting this. This is more charitable than I was expecting.
Oh dear, what do you think?
He's clearly weaponizing everything, and I think he's turning to that self-interest and greed by the end of it. I was going to ask you if you thought that he always had this turn to being the new dictator, if you thought that was always within him, or if you thought that was the result of him drinking the water of life and fully developing that ability of prescience and seeing the future.
The water of life is challenging. And this is something that it's hard because I don't know if it's explained more in the book. I really don't know how much of an effect the water of life actually has. Like, I feel like there are lots of options. Number one, it does completely change your outlook on everything, and it gives you all this knowledge. And so then, of course, the decisions you make are going to be changed. Number two, is it a placebo effect? And like it really doesn't do anything or much of anything, but you feel like, well, I must be enlightened now that I've had this water of life. And so I feel like I have to make different decisions and I have to like value my own opinions of things more highly. Or does it do nothing at all? and you know it doesn't do anything at all, but you don't want the illusion to break, so you lie and you use it to your advantage. I really don't know. And that's where it's kind of hard for me to judge.
I think if you take a sympathetic view of Paul, which I don't, I think you would blame his turn on the water of life. But if you look at the different result that it has on him versus Lady Jessica, when she drinks the water, she gets the knowledge of all the other Reverend Mothers and their experiences, which all falling into your brain at once is enough to drive you crazy.
Of
and
course.
You've got the weird, creepy baby talking to you in your head.
She's dealing with a lot.
But what Paul gets when he takes a much bigger dose and he's in a coma for 3 weeks is the prescience, which is those visions of all of the possible futures.
Yeah.
And that could drive you crazy. But
Sure.
I don't think that's a satisfying explanation to blame it on the water of life.
I agree.
Because the terrible purpose thing we've talked about in the book discussions, that's there from the very, very start of the novel.
Yes, I remember that from the beginning that I've read, yeah.
So like this, I feel like we're coming to a head now of the conversation I was trying to have when we were talking about the book, when I was talking about the shifting Shakespeare, where I thought it was going to be Henry IV, and then it moved into some Hamlet and some Macbeth. We've now reached that point where I guess I can ask you that Macbeth question. Is Paul's turn at the end of this movie to becoming a dictator and a fascist and holy war and jihad and all that stuff, is that him being driven mad by prophecy like Macbeth was? Or is he seeing the possibility of the moment, being opportunistic, and seizing the advantage of the fundamentalism? Like purely clear-eyed and manipulative.
I certainly don't think he's being driven mad by prophecy, or like I don't think he can plead innocence by reason of insanity. I don't think that's what he can do here. I think that's giving him way too much credit and cutting him way too much slack. I don't think he's being driven crazy by all these possibilities, but I think he is becoming very obsessed with all the possibilities that he sees. And I think in his mind, the only way to gain control and make sure the right outcome happens is to take advantage of being this religious figure, of the power that people are very willingly and openly and almost forcefully giving him. And so I think he's like, well, I don't want any of the bad things to happen. Bad in his mind, not necessarily bad for the greater good. I think he's going past that. But I think he's like, okay, I don't want the bad thing to happen. I see an opportunity here to take power. I'm going to use it.
So I can do a lesser genocide to avoid a larger one. Like I talked about in the book that Paul becomes, the way he justifies his actions, it becomes this slippery slope full of greater goods and lesser evils.
Yeah,
And I'm seeing some of that happen in this moment.
Yes.
But did you take that last 10 minutes after he wins the duel against Fade Rautha? Did you take that as a turn from him being this villain, or did you see it as him being on the precipice of becoming like this dictatorial figure?
I feel like his turn happened a lot earlier.
Okay.
A lot earlier than I think he is cognizant of. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest those were the only choices. I wanted to know where you thought that kind of happened.
I think it happens earlier than he thinks, because that's what I mean. I think that he is trying to be strategic and use the tools and things he has available to make the right outcomes happen. I think that is truly his intention in the beginning. Is I want revenge for my father. I want me and my mom and my unborn sister to be safe. I'm integrating with these Fremen. They're now my people. I want them to be safe. I want everything to be okay. I want, the emperor defeated. I want all these good things to happen. I want to prevent terrible hunger and death and genocide and all these things. I want to prevent all that. But then as things go on, he's like, well, I can use this thing. I want people to listen to me. They're going to listen to me if I do this, so I might as well. And I mean, that's the thing about temptation, change, power, like becoming a different person. It doesn't happen in one moment. It doesn't happen just when you drink the water of life. It happens slowly and invisibly until all of a sudden it's huge, and that's very, very scary. So I don't think Paul is truly aware of the turn he's made until much later than he should be aware of it. I think by the end of the movie, he's pretty aware of what's happened, and he's going with it, and he's kind of gone off the deep end a bit. But I don't think he catches on nearly as early as he should.
The crouching scene?
Certainly catches on a lot earlier.
The scene where he's crouching and screaming at everyone?
Oh, yeah.
I think he's got it by that point.
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah. But it's scary. But here's my question for you. You've read the book. You've read past this. You know more.
Oh, yeah.
What should Paul have done instead? Like,
It's
what do you think
interesting,
he
isn't
should have
it?
done? Just like gone off in the desert and just kind of like lived by himself forever? Like, what should he have done? Because I don't know. I don't have a good answer. Like, what else would you do?
Yeah, I mean, I like the way. Again, I do think this is a gorgeous adaptation of the story, and the fact, and I've wrestled with this constantly in our book discussions, that Paul becomes, I think, an unforgivable figure, but he's also fascinating,
Right.
and I love following his character. I find him interesting in the same way. It made me think back to an old Patreon episode we did about true crime.
Oh, yeah.
When you were talking about how taken you were by some of these cases and the way the public imagination is always caught by serial killers.
Of course, yeah.
And the way the History Channel is just, endless Hitler documentaries because
Right.
it's interesting.
Yeah.
Like
People are fascinated by evil. It's incredibly interesting.
the
Yeah.
extremity of evil is fascinating. And I love the way the movie, because you can't adapt everything from the books.
Sure.
So sometimes you have to shorthand some things to develop, especially moral problems, quickly and clearly. And the way they say, the great houses are all hanging above us right now, and they're all going to kill you. That, I mean, if you're talking about inflection points for Paul's character, once he overthrows the emperor, then it's a secondary choice to do the crusade through all of these people's planets. So I guess you could say you dispose or depose? Is that the word?
Depose, I think, is
The
what you-
previous emperor.
Yeah, depose.
That's fine. He seems like a bad dude. But then do you have to do the endless jihad across the galaxy?
Yeah,
That's a
you
different
don't.
question. But
Yeah.
if the great houses are hanging above you, like, I like that the story can spiral into those sort of what if moments. But I still don't think that justifies Paul's actions.
No, it definitely doesn't. That's the struggle.
He also doesn't attempt diplomacy.
Well, right. There's also that. Like, but that's very, very true. He kind of just, but you could argue, well, he has to assert his power. He's not going to stand down for things. He can't be pushed around. He's in this like sort of this underdog position where he's this like 20-year-old kid who's like from this ostracized land, and he has to like, or has been living in this ostracized land, and he has to like seize control, and like he's got to really overdo it and overassert his power and dominance to this, emperor figure. So you could see why he's doing that, but it's still, of course, did he have to? Like, I don't know. That's what I mean. It's tough.
Yeah, it's tough. I said this in one of the book discussions. I'm not even sure if it's come out yet, that every time I think I can fully, cleanly condemn this character and their whole course of action, there's this undercurrent and this moment of doubt or humanity. And I'm very curious to see how that's going to come up in the next movie, because I don't know if this Paul, with this cast of, cut down characters, has a confidant in that way that he can talk to.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I can't go further with that point without spoiling Messiah. I want to spend a minute talking about adaptation.
Okay.
So,
really quick, before we get to adaptation.
Yeah, sure.
I'm now thinking about the Water of Life, which is...
You're only now thinking.
No, I'm thinking about it. There's so much religion in this story. There's so much about that's like critiquing religion, critiquing religious power, critiquing like religious, organized religion, right? The Water of Life is just the tree of knowledge from Genesis, from the Adam and Eve story. And I'm wondering about that because I've always found, not always, for most of my rational, thinking adult life,
Sure.
I have found that story to be so awful because the whole idea is that Adam and Eve want to know stuff, and that is what gets them banished from the Garden of Paradise. They are punished for eternity because they want to know something. And I know that's an incredibly simplified version of what's going on, but all of biblical stories are simple. So what do you want from me? And so if the Water of Life is sort of functioning the same way as the Tree of Knowledge, that's interesting because Herbert seems to be critiquing a lot about religion, and yet here the Water of Life is what sort of leads to a lot of this destruction and bad things happening and corrupted power. So is the message here that we shouldn't seek out all of this knowledge?
No,
Do you know what I'm saying?
I don't think so at all. I think the prescience that Paul unlocks, seeing the future, it's not one future. He sees all the possible futures and consequences and 40th order knock-on effects of all of these decisions.
Yeah.
And there's never clear moment where he can say that all of these things will come to pass. Can you trust all of these prophecies completely? Are they guaranteed? Is there some butterfly effect that's going to screw up what I'm trying to bring to pass? I think that maybe is the wiggle room for humanity and trying to rationalize them a bit. But I don't think it's as clear as that.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting that the water of life has a totally different effect on Jessica versus Paul. Jessica inherits all this knowledge of all the past Reverend Mothers, and she's truly like eating of the tree of knowledge. She is gaining all of this knowledge about the past. And yet Paul is not really getting that, but he's getting glimpses of possible futures. Is that because he's a man and she's a woman? It's because men apparently can't drink this water and it's a whole thing.
It would have killed him. That's why he's in the coma for 3 months. It's
right.
because the movie didn't have enough time to establish that she's a Bene Gesserit and that he is half Bene Gesserit on her side, which is unusual for a man, and that he's half Mentat on his father's side.
Oh, okay.
And that those together, with maybe some is he, isn't he, of some of these prophecies, gives him this extraordinary ability and insight, where there is something mystical about his power in the story.
Well, because he's also already having like visionistic, prophetic dreams before he even drinks this water. He's having them in part 1.
It's from the moment he sees the spice in the tent.
Yeah, the spice.
And that's when these insights start dropping in, but the prescience levels up when he drinks the water of life. And I think if you're going to make a case for when the Paul part dies away or takes a back seat, I think it would be that moment. But you could also say that it's in the tent, or the first time when he's on his knees by the spice harvester.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, even in the book, in the very beginning, when he's still on Caladan, it says that he has like prophetic dreams.
He's also worried about the terrible purpose from the first chapter.
So it's I'm like wondering how much he's just like playing it up with the water of life. I'm like, are you really having visions of the future, or are you just saying that?
That's interesting.
Like, and it might be that there is a definitive answer, but the fact that the movie makes me question that, I think, is really interesting and tells us a lot about what's happening with Paul.
This feels like the moments where people say, like, would you kill baby Hitler? Like, when does he become that?
Right.
It's interesting and I don't think there is a clean answer for how you zero in on that.
No.
But it's one of the better questions begged by the novel, and of course this rock solid adaptation of the novel.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now that I've made you think about the way that we adapt the water of life, let's talk more about adaptation.
Yeah. So I want to talk about a couple changes. Nothing huge. The big ones I will leave for you to discover on your own time.
Okay. I'm excited.
I want to spend a minute on Chani, because I love what they've done to this character. This is one of the changes I was happier with here. They make this subset of the younger Fremen a voice for doubt. Yeah. And of a less fundamentalist perspective.
Yeah, they're skeptics.
Right. And I think that does add some texture to the Fremen, to her character. I have no doubt in my mind she will end up pivoting back to what the character does in the book, because there are some things she does
for things.
Yeah, the story can't continue unless she does a couple of very important things here.
Okay.
But I like this.
Yeah.
And I think this gives her character much more to do, because when you have someone as talented as Zendaya, you want to give her something to do. So I think that was smart. I think it makes the Fremen seem more believable. I also think it gives a 21st century audience a foothold when we are increasingly irreligious.
Yes, especially younger generations. Yeah.
Even just voicing that perspective, I think it then lets us feel heard a little bit.
Yeah, and just like we understand how we could fit into this story if we were there, because if everybody around you is just this like crazy religious, not like, I don't mean like crazy loopy, I just mean like incredibly so intensely like religious and fundamental. Yeah, you'll sit there thinking, well, I would never do any of this, these people are all dumb, so to have this like range of belief and skepticism amongst the people, I think humanizes everybody a bit more and just gives you more of a foothold, especially for a mainstream audience. That makes sense.
A couple characters they had to cut, I imagine, for time. Margot Fenring, who's Leah Seydoux character, who has the rendezvous with Fade.
Yeah.
Her husband is really interesting. That is a fantastic scheming, plotting scene during Fade's little birthday bash, where he's in the stands next to the Baron. And they have this fantastic conversation that does a lot of the world building for the drama around spice production and this economy.
Cool.
And I that's one of my favorite scenes from the book. Totally understand why it wasn't in the movie, but I also kind of wish it was.
Yeah.
They also cut Hawat, They didn't have time for Thufir Hawat to come back.
That's right, yeah.
And another amazing character. They do something really cool in the book. When you get there, I'm excited to hear what you think about that.
Okay.
They give his character a lot of texture in the same way I talked about earlier, Book Gurney.
Yes,
getting a lot of texture, flipping sides a little bit.
Did it make sense why they cut it for the movie?
Yes.
Okay.
And apparently they filmed it, and you can see him in the background of one scene, but it doesn't matter.
Okay.
The biggest change, which I can't go into in particular detail here, the biggest change is excluding the 2-year time jump in the middle of the book.
Yes.
Which means that Jessica's pregnant for the whole movie.
Right.
Which means that she doesn't have the baby, which changes a bunch of stuff from what happens in the book.
But of course, in the book, she has it or loses it. She's not still pregnant after 2 years. Yeah.
Right. And that becomes the greatest shift, not just in plot and characterization. They have to reassign some pivotal actions for certain characters, but also, I think, tonally. This is the ghost of a spoiler. There's a lot of weird shit in the back of this book connected to that.
Okay.
And I think you sort of sanitize some of that. And that, again, I get it. It's fine. Mm-hmm. But I want to see the weird stuff.
That's
I told you in the car the other day, the more I read of this series, I mean, okay, here's another minor. There's like a fish guy in a tank who's a main character in Messiah.
A fish
guy in a tank who's popping like capsules of spice.
Nice.
And just getting shit. Anyway.
Do you think there will be fish guy in the next movie?
I dearly hope so. There's a lot of weird new concepts in the next one. And I want to see that on screen. And again, I'm worried if you don't microdose weirdness through the story, then when you're forced to introduce it, it feels sudden.
And it feels like weird and uneasy. So, yeah.
I'm not quite sure there.
Am I dumb? In part 1, do we know that Jessica is pregnant? Because it came as a very big surprise to me when it happened at the beginning of this movie. And I thought maybe I just missed it. I don't remember them talking about it, right? Or am I just totally missing it? Am I now throwing you off and now you don't know?
I'm just remembering when Paul, and this is the only scientifically accurate way to say it, when Paul trips balls the first time when he gets hit by the spice in the tent in the first movie, he like looks at his mother, figures out immediately that they're Harkonnens and tells her she's pregnant.
Oh, wow. Incredible.
That's sort of clouding my memory.
Okay.
But it's very funny.
It felt, because I don't remember them revealing that in the first movie. And so it felt a lot like the way that they handled Remus and Tonks in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows.
Holding her stomach.
In the movie where they were like, we have to establish that they're in a relationship. We have to establish that they're married. And we have to establish that she's pregnant. And then they die. And then Harry becomes his godfather. Like, they zoom past all of that in the most aggressively quick, like, messy way. And it's so funny to me. And that's how this felt. I was like, oh, she's pregnant? Like, it was so weird. I don't know. I feel like I just needed, like, 15 seconds for them to, like, Paul, I'm pregnant. Like, I don't know. There needed to be something, and there just wasn't. And maybe I'm just not remembering. If you remember, comment down below, because I don't know what's going on. Anyway, sorry. Go forward.
There's a little cry for help in the middle of the episode.
I really need to know if I'm dumb or if the movie messed up.
One of the best translations, I think, from the book, points of adaptation here, was emphasizing again and again the importance in the demarcation between the north of Arrakis and the south.
Yeah.
And I think it became this fantastic shorthand to allow Paul to repeatedly try to avoid fulfilling the prophecy. And it becomes a breaking point when he, of course, does go south. But I think it gave him that bit of humanity, that like frustrating edge of doubt and restraint in humanity that continues through the arc of his character. I'm really glad they got some of that in there because Beautiful Boy, Little Women, any of the other Timothée Chalamet movies, he has such a fantastic compassion and tragedy to him. As excited as I was to see him go like full Beast Raban Harkonnen at the end with the, high octane, loud, angry, controlling stuff, I loved that there were those softer moments, those more vulnerable moments. So
yeah,
I thought they did a beautiful job giving Paul at least as much texture as possible, even if other characters had to be smoothed over a bit.
Yeah, that is true. They did Paul very, very well, I thought. I mean, I'm saying as somebody who's only read like 50 pages of the book, but I think he's a really fantastic character, and I think it could have been very easy to just make him a villain really quickly, and they've instead really given us time to appreciate his humanity and all the good parts about him, and then be, confused by or curious about or even like hurt by the bad things that he chooses to do. So
a couple other shout outs I want to do here, just while we're sort of complimenting some of the things that really stood out to us. The atomics.
Oh, yeah.
That scene, seeing the warheads.
That was
I
cool.
thought that was startling in the best way. Also, that moment right before the big battle, when Paul's kind of getting the lay of the land and they're looking through the binoculars, and there's that disgusting noise every time they change the level of zoom in the binoculars.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like this blinking, glooping noise.
Yeah, it's weird.
It was so gross, and it was like eyelids closing. But anyway,
Yeah.
that scene with the binoculars, checking the lay of the land before the big fight, I felt that scene so strongly reading the book. I thought that was
you told me
so
that.
visceral. I really saw that moment, and that was adapted perfectly to what I was hoping for, having just read the book
Like
so
a week
thoroughly.
ago. Yeah, that's so nice when that happens,
I
when
love
something
that.
plays out exactly the way you imagined it. And you can never like get that 100% of the time because everybody's going to imagine things differently, et cetera, but it's nice when that happens.
Also, I thought immersing Paul and Lady Jessica, respectively, into their different parts of the Fremen tradition that they really glommed onto, I thought that was done incredibly well. It was quick, it was efficient, it was believable. It didn't take up 40 minutes of the movie. I thought that was really, really well done.
Yeah, it was.
The last one I want to play with here is what I want to call the quiet. This is the thing that really like got me mad when I was doing my notes in a good way. What I want to call like the quiet corruption of Leto Atreides.
Okay.
Every time they like invoked his name or memory here, it was like a bastardization of it. There's that point of contrast really early in the movie where Jessica tells Paul, "Your father didn't believe in revenge." And Paul
Yes.
says, "Yeah, well, I do."
Yeah,
And I think that starts that point, that divergence between their characters.
Yes.
But the rest of those moments of divergence are much quieter and I think more rewarding. But I love that they signposted the beginning of the trend and then kind of ran away with it. The perversion of the scene in part 1 in the graveyard, when Leto is talking to Paul and trying to encourage him. He's not telling him to go be a fascist, but he's telling him you might be called to lead and you should be like humble and giving,
cautious
and grateful and all of those, good qualities. To then his son taking the mantle of leadership at the end of the movie in the most manipulative, inorganic way, becoming this rigged messiah, exploiting religious hope, poverty, and fundamentalism.
Yeah.
Is such like a beautiful, wicked twist of that speech. And you can see, did Paul take the wrong message from that? Or did he take that as like a lesson of what he can exploit in people later?
And it becomes so much more painful too because of the scene where he's with Chani and they're looking out at the sand. And she says, does water really fall from the sky where you're from? And then he's telling her about the ocean and the sea and how their castle overlooks the water. And I feel like the only time when I picture like the castle in Caladan overlooking the sea in this like very like Irish way, I think of the scene that scene with Leto, where because they're out at the graveyard, which is like overlooking the ocean. And so to be reminded of that scene only for Paul to then completely do the opposite of what his father advised him to do is so sad and heartbreaking.
Leto's a good guy who's good at his job. And the second he got this terrible new position, he came to Arrakis and tried to do the right thing. He tried to respect and get to know the Fremen. He sacrificed the spice harvester, which was an ungodly amount of money when
Right.
he's being set up with this new job and he has to start the production immediately. He sacrifices all of that, possibly his life, possibly his son's life, to
Right.
save 6 guys he's never met.
Yeah.
He's an incredible guy.
Yeah.
And I think the point of contrast going through this movie as Paul becomes less and less of an incredible guy,
Yeah.
you see him invoke these elements of his father and you feel so bitter and frustrated as an audience member the way he repurposes the ducal signet, that
Yeah.
ring. The way
yeah.
he ruins and tarnishes the flag, the family sigil, the last name of Atreides to become this holy war through the universe. The cruelty he shows to Lady Jessica
Yeah.
when all we saw was warmth. And Leto's like last words was that he should have married Lady Jessica.
Right. Yeah.
I was so angry at all of those moments. And I think that gave a character root to Paul's dehumanization. Because obviously you can get mad at him for what he's doing geopolitically, what he's doing to the Fremen, what he's doing to all these different groups of people. But to bring it back to his father, to remember him as this like clean-cut 15-year-old that he was in the first movie.
Right.
I thought that was a beautiful, almost twisted callback that they did throughout this movie.
Right, and it's so painful that his initial primary motivation is revenge for his father, is revenge for, you know, this person that he loved and admired, and this collapse of his house. And so then it's so sad that instead of living up to his father's legacy, being the person his father was and taught him to be, and bringing, you know, this honor back to House Atreides, and instead just completely like destroying it and going this totally opposite direction. It's very sad.
So there's a game, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and it's a Viking game, and your father is killed immediately. You know, it's Bambi style to give you something to do, something to fight for, and that you get your father's axe.
Yes.
And then it's a 100-hour game, and you get a million other weapons. Me being me, I only used my father's axe because for me, that was the story.
Yeah, you can't get rid of it.
That was the story. I didn't care if the other ones had better stats. This is who I was. This is why I was fighting. When he makes the Emperor kiss the ring of the man he betrayed, I'll defend that.
Sure.
I'll totally defend that.
Yeah.
Because that is in keeping with Gurney's type of loyalty, of killing Beast Raban, of like particularly avenging Leto when he says, for my duke and family and friends. That kind of revenge, I think, is defensible.
Yes. Right.
It's
because it's on a micro
war
level
after that. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the kind of final nail in the coffin here was seeing. I mean, when you see Timothée Chalamet, what do you think? You look at the hair. Mm-hmm. You see how it's being styled that day.
Sure.
You see how it was slicked back in the first movie, made him look like a little boy.
Right.
And then you see it all big and flowing and gorgeous and locks of love that he's got in this movie.
Yeah.
And then right towards the end of the movie, when he's putting some Harkonnen clothing on, he's kind of like intermingling that with the Fremen robes, and you see he's starting to turn, become his own guy. He's dressing like a Sith Lord.
Yeah.
His hair starts moving backwards.
Oh, does it?
And it looks more swept back by the end.
I didn't notice that.
Like his father.
Yeah, like his father. Yes, it's like all this is slicked back. Yeah.
It's another corruption, perversion, bastardization.
Also, his father was like
Leto.
always wearing black. Like he was always wearing those like the Atreides like all black.
But in a formal way.
Doublet. Right.
In a formal way.
Right.
And
in a respectable way.
Paul evoking these things while he is succumbing to that temptation, self-interest, greed, war crimes. That just really got my blood boiling. So I really enjoyed that because that stuff for me is pure Shakespeare. That's why the first movie's better for me, because it's the first Godfather. It's the operatic implosion of this family.
Right. But it's interesting because I feel like it's such a unique thing, like in terms of his connection to his father, because often you'll either see a grand hero who, I mean, like you said, maybe not Bambi style, but like, you know, Lion King style, you know, somebody avenging their father and like seeking revenge and becoming the person their father was and wanted them to be and all that. Or you see somebody turning because they hated their father. Their father was terrible. Their father showed them no love or compassion, and so they became this terrible person, an anti-hero. And my dad was mean to me, so I'm also going to be mean.
Villain origin story.
Yeah, right. It's like you see those two.
Yeah.
You don't see this weird mingling of them.
Yes.
And that's like, and it's so upsetting.
It's texture.
You absolutely believe it. It doesn't feel like unbelievable and weird and discordant. Like it totally works and you believe it, but it's so upsetting.
And to their credit,
I like that.
a lot of that is fresh. A lot of that is additions that aren't things in the book or aren't hit like they are here. So I think
these little nods to Leto and stuff.
I mean, they don't reference Paul's hair looking like his dad's. Like,
Sure.
I think a lot of those are compliments to Villeneuve and the co-writer, who I believe is named John Spates.
Okay.
I might be mispronouncing the last name, but huge credit to them because I think they're making a lot of these points here.
Yeah.
To zero in a little bit more on Shakespeare and pacing, because I think those ideas come together here. This was so much of what our early book conversations were about. Was about the pacing of exploring this massive world. Do we kind of have POV characters like Game of Thrones? How are we moving through this? Every chapter felt like a scene. I sort of liked that from a theatrical background.
Sure, yeah.
And Shakespeare, like what's the parallel here? What's the Shakespearean analog for this story? And I think a lot of that questioning and shifting was present in part 2 here, especially the shift towards Shakespeare's histories away from his tragedies. But I think this was sort of less of a blowout, satisfying ending than part 1 had with the big fall of House Atreides.
Sure.
And I want to talk about this in terms of pacing, because when you're going to Oppenheimer and it's 3 hours long, does that movie feel long to you at all?
No, but it's because it's the best movie ever made.
Right.
And because there's so much going on. You're following so many characters and threads, and the way that it's told, nothing resolves until the end. You keep like leaving things off and then not touching them for an hour. But you're thinking about it the whole time, but you're also engaged by the other plot that's happening, but you can't wait also to get back to Los Alamos. And the way it all weaves together, it keeps you engaged and like curious and on the edge of your seat the whole time.
But pacing is the magic trick.
Yeah.
That challenges the tangibility of time.
Yeah.
And for me, part 1 never felt long. I never got it when people said part 1 felt really long to them and really slow. I never got that at all. I adored part 1.
Yeah.
I think this movie felt kind of long in that it felt like the first movie was, I got my money's worth after the Harkonnen raid, and then everything with the Fremen was like bonus time setting up part 2. I was happy to watch it, but it felt like an after credit scene.
Sure.
This movie felt longer than the first movie to me in that it felt like more than one movie kind of smushed together.
It really did. There was just, they're covering a lot of ground. You don't meet Fade Routha or Lea Seydoux character, or like you don't meet a lot of these people until a good chunk into the movie, which is like fine. Like it's okay to introduce people mid-movie. Like it's not that like in and of itself isn't bad, but I just felt like when we still had like an hour left of the movie to go, I was like, there's a lot going on in this movie. And I just felt, again, just a little bit overwhelmed. It wasn't like information overload. Like I was clear about what was happening and I was still incredibly engaged and the movie still looked incredibly gorgeous. And I was like, still, this is like a once in a lifetime cinematic experience. Like it was still great, but it did feel like there's a lot happening in this world. And I feel like we are really like backloading it. Like the last third felt really, really dense, and I had a bit of a tough time with it.
Well, the book is split into 3 parts, and this was 2 movies.
Well, right, like doesn't like part 1 kind of end around the same time as book 1? Give or
the
take.
moment I crossed the part in the movie a bit of the way through part 2.
Okay,
it's not that clean.
Okay.
But I understand, like, the movie is so gorgeous. It's so entertaining. It's so intriguing. It's so exciting. All of those things are always happening. I'm always enjoying myself.
Yes.
But I agree that it was overwhelming. There were so many full chapters of story.
Yes.
And then when we got to the end, to the big operatic finale of this movie that kind of feels like 2 movies, I wanted Paul's turn to hit a little harder.
It didn't feel like an end. It felt like another, like the ending of part 1. Because the ending isn't after the Harkonnen raid. The ending is after Paul and Jessica are able to escape and they come upon, like they join the Fremen.
It's the duel with Jamis.
Yeah, it's that whole duel. That ending feels a little bit unsatisfactory, but it's okay because you know it's part 1 of 2. And so you're like, okay, a big thing just happened. This duel happened and that was all fine and well, whatever. But it is setting up a part 2. So I'm not mad that the ending was not fully satisfying. This ending felt the same. But I know we're probably going to get a part 3. But I feel like if you call it part 1 and 2, like I feel like these should be sort of a complete duology. Especially because it's supposed to be the end of this whole novel. Right? It's supposed to be the end of the novel Dune, the end of book 3, which is called, what is it called? Prophet. Like it didn't feel like a complete ending. Again, I know we're setting up for another one, but it didn't feel fully satisfying. It just kind of felt like the movie ended and not like it had an ending.
To pivot back to Star Wars, as we've been chatting, we've been talking about Star Wars throughout our Dune conversations.
Yeah.
The end of the 3rd prequel movie is Anakin's gone, stuff happened. Now Darth Vader, you see the helmet lowering down.
Yes.
He's bad boy now. Yes. I feel like, plot-wise, that's sort of what's happening at the end here.
Sure.
Paul's gone. He's now the big bad Muad'Dib.
Yeah.
Which means that the turn should feel venomous, and it should feel impossible to come back from. Mm-hmm. It should feel like you don't recognize him, but you're also kind of afraid this was in him the whole time. It should feel like that kind of mic drop, scary, oh shit, cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And I wanted it to feel like that. Uh-huh. But it didn't really feel like that for me.
Yeah.
And I can't like particularly locate Why?
I just feel like I needed one more thing to happen. I feel like I needed
It's in the book. I can't tell you what it is, but it's in the book.
I feel like he needed to like do one more bad thing. It felt like we ended with him about to kind of to gesture at doing something. And that was, I felt a strange way to end it.
He does more bad things in the book, and importantly, more bad things happen to him in the book.
Okay,
which feel like slippery slope moments of, well, I'm angry, so I can justify doing some bad stuff. And if you do more and more of that, you become unrecognized.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like, I do not envy Villeneuve and his creative team trying to adapt this story. It sounds very, very difficult. But the ending was a little tough for me. I was torn between, this movie is really long, but I don't feel like we're getting to an ending. But then also, please, can this be the ending? But it's not a good ending. Like, it was very weird. It's a
strange sense because I think we are feeling the same way about the last 40 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
But for the first 40, I was blown away at the power
I was having a great time.
of adaptation. Because I know what they're doing from the book here, and they are blowing through so much plot. They are moving so smoothly and just rocketing through material. I was so impressed by the beginning of the movie. It's so clearly, so lovingly a smart and efficient translation of this source material. I was just, you can feel it. It's just tangible through the screen. And I was blown away by that in the beginning. But this movie, compared to the first one, feels dense in a different way than the first movie does. And
I totally agree. This
form of density is more fatiguing than it was before, to the point
that's a good way to describe it. It was a little fatiguing.
Like, it makes me, I appreciate the work they're doing.
Of course.
I don't know why I keep feeling the need to say that. It's because I really do, and I recognize the difficulty of the task.
Yeah.
But it made me really admire and appreciate what Frank Herbert did with that book, because that book is so perfectly tuned. There's so much more, the character work, the heart, the way he's dividing the story into these clean books and chapters, the way he's bouncing between storylines with breaks, you don't get fatigued, so you can keep it interesting. Let's spend some time with the Baron and freak ourselves out again. Oh, he's so gross. And Frank Herbert is such an agile storyteller that, of course, his execution of this material is going to be better. But I just wish, I don't know if I'm wishing that they had 20 more minutes to play with.
Right, because then it's like, oh, that would have been such a long movie. Or like, should they have just done 3 movies?
3 for 3, even if you need to juggle some stuff around.
I think maybe they should have just done 3 movies.
That's sort of where I'm landing. This is sort of my final word here. I know we're going long, but there's a lot to talk about.
Whatever.
It's a 3-hour movie, and this is Dune month. We're devouring Dune. This is our project.
We are truly devouring, sandworm style.
Talking about Dune Messiah, I think there is a corollary in these first 2 Dune movies. I think you can compare them to Lord of the Rings. No qualitative judgment, but massive operatic journey. Huge betrayals. Duncan Idaho is Boromir. You can have fun with that.
Amazing cast of characters. These great actors in this like
murderer's
in this like gorgeous, like cinematically stunning, imagined world. I was like imaginated. Woo, imagined world. Listen, it's like 8 p.m. Imagined world, right? Like there's a lot of crossover there, definitely.
So if the first 2 movies, being the first book, is more Lord of the Rings, the second book is Game of Thrones. And I think I might like Messiah more, but I think they're 2 pretty perfect books. Spoiler, we've already recorded our episode about Messiah. It'll come out in a few weeks.
It will.
But Messiah is a major shift from the style and the approach, the expectations of the first movie and the first book here.
Yeah.
In the way it handles scale, it's much smaller. Its tone is more serious. The set pieces are council meetings. It's plots, it's whispers and rumors, hidden conversations, eavesdropping.
Yeah.
It's all that Littlefinger Varys stuff. That's why I made that Game of Thrones comparison.
Yeah, sure.
It's much more of that. It's a story of political intrigue, palace drama, with the weirdest big swing sci-fi concepts thrown in there. But those are the big players in that story. It's brief but incredible when Messiah gives you those traditional Dune set pieces. There are moments of blockbuster action. There are huge things there that I'm not even going to gesture at.
Okay.
It gives you some of those big Dune moments, but most of it is more Game of Thronesy, if we're using that shorthand.
Okay.
But Dune Messiah takes place after the Jihad.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It starts after that.
That's
A
right, we
full
talked about that.
11 years.
That's pretty crazy.
If you're including the 9 years, because it's 9 years that Messiah starts after Dune, and you add in the 2-year time jump that they
in
skipped
the
over
middle
in the
of
first Dune.
Dune, yeah.
Like that's 11 years
Yeah, it's a
from the
long
beginning of
time.
Dune to when Messiah starts. It's a very different world, and you're skipping a lot of that traditional action.
Yeah.
So I guess the maybe some of the questions to leave off here. Do you think they can or should make a loyal Messiah? Are they going to include some of the Holy War stuff?
I think they're going to have to include some of it. I think that's going to be their challenge. And I kind of wonder if they'll just do 2 movies for Dune Messiah. Like, will they do like Dune Messiah part 1 and 2? Like, I kind of think they might do that because I think from a like
No.
Hollywood, you don't think they'll do that?
It's a 350-page book.
Okay.
Dune is like 900.
Well,
so.
regardless, I think they're gonna have to show some of it because from like a Hollywood like standpoint, you have to like show this stuff on screen, like
Yeah.
especially when you've like set it up. I mean, I think it's even a strange choice in your book. It sounds like it works at
It
least
is.
for you, but it's a strange choice in a book, not to mention a visual medium. So they're gonna have to show some of it. So maybe they kind of do a bunch of time jumps and just do little like incremental check-ins. Like I don't know how they're gonna. It's hard because I don't know what happens in this actual plot. But
You could do a good adaptation of Messiah and throw in some stuff filling in the gaps of the time jump within the space of one movie. But I guess I'm not sure if any version of Messiah would work with movie audiences. Would they lean
Oh.
into it, or would they kind of revolt? Because
it's so weird.
well, Frank Herbert wrote Messiah because some people still liked Paul.
Oh my! And he had to be like, y'all,
Yeah,
don't
it's
you
like,
understand?
This is a warning about charismatic leaders and
Oh,
all these other
dear.
things and fundamentalism. And I'm curious to see how that is going to be received. Do you think this movie, Dune Part 2, set the table for Messiah, for the kind of story I'm describing here?
I think so. I mean, in terms of like it definitely set it up to be like, hey, this is a guy who went real bad. I think it, and then like leaves us wondering, so who will our hero be instead? I think it's really set up for that, and just wondering like, what are the consequences of becoming this kind of leader, of seeking this kind of power, of manipulating your circumstances in this way.
But remember that warning about heroes in the first book?
Yes,
They cut that line
They did.
from the first movie.
That doesn't mean that but I think the sentiment still stands. That's what I mean. I don't think they're like. I don't think part 2 is sort of setting up like a. I don't think we're meant to feel sympathetic towards Paul and what he becomes. I really don't think that's what's supposed to happen.
When I talked about that revolving door, though, I think that's important to establish so the trends don't seem sudden and inorganic. Do you think part 1 set up part 2? In the same way I'm asking, do you think part 2 sets up Messiah?
I mean, yeah. I mean, because of the way that things change so much throughout part 1, and then we're sort of set up to expect things to change often, for characters to die, for characters to replace other characters. I think it's not a surprise what happens with Paul. It's hard because the way that we've talked about the series and just like what I just like generally culturally know about the series is that Paul takes a turn. Like I kind of knew that, so I wasn't like surprised when Paul took this turn. But I think also the movie sets you up to fear that and to be wary of that. And so when it happens, it is upsetting and like exciting, but also makes sense. So I think it is setting. I mean, what I think it's setting up is what's going to happen. Like what happens after a person comes to power like this? What are the consequences, both in short term and long term? And who comes after, like thinking about his unborn sister, thinking about Chani, thinking about Irulan, thinking about if they have any children, like what's going to happen there. I mean, obviously the Bene Gesserit are still, spinning their little webs. So what are they going to do? So I think that's what it's setting up.
If I'm comparing the first movie to The Godfather, do you make Messiah more like Godfather 2? Where you've got the real-time storyline, continuing stuff with Michael, and then the flashback half would be what happens in the intervening 10 years.
Oh, like before the time jump?
Or that's how you fill in the time jump?
That could be interesting to sort of like tell those two, like
it's kind of an olive branch.
Those
to the
timelines
audience.
in parallel.
To give them more cinematic stuff.
Oh, you
I
mean
guess.
like Oppenheimer style? Like telling two different
Less
timelines.
intricate, but yeah.
Yeah, and not nearly as tapestryal.
Because my sneaking suspicion, now that we've seen a full adaptation of Dune, the first book. Now that we've seen that, and I can kind of wrap my mind around that, we're seeing it again tomorrow. But anyway, now that I've got my head around this version of this story, my sneaking suspicion is that Dune should have just been 3 movies, because not only do I think it works better with the division of the story and the time jump, but I also think then those 3 movies could have been normal length. Because even if it's the coolest stuff in the world, if it's 2 hours and 50 minutes of it, you know?
Yeah.
Like if this had been a little bit easier to consume, I'm not saying like 90 minutes doesn't have to be the Evil Dead, but
this kind of thing can't be 90 minutes.
If you made 3 of them and they were a bit more digestible, and then if there's like a commercial appetite to do more, then you can do 1 movie for Messiah, and then probably 2 movies for Children of Dune. You can play with Anya Taylor-Joy. You can do whatever you want then.
Yeah.
Like maybe that would have been a better approach.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like
that's always tough. Like I don't have like anything. I don't have particular opinions about movie lengths, except for horror movies. All horror should be 90 minutes, but that's a completely different situation. Like I don't have obviously. I said 20 minutes ago, Oppenheimer is like my favorite movie ever. That movie is nearly 3 hours long. And I think it needs to be that long, and it works being that long, and it doesn't feel long. Compare it to Killers of the Flower Moon, which felt like it lasted about 7 hours.
Part of me is still watching that.
Yeah, even though it's the same length as Oppenheimer, because it wasn't nearly as compelling or well paced. The characters weren't as like interesting. Like it didn't go as many cool places. Like it just didn't work.
We talked about that in the Patreon episode. If you want more,
we did. Check it out.
It had one idea for 12 hours.
But I think like this. Okay, Dune Part 1's what, 2.5 hours?
Yes,
and then this one's like 2:45
roughly.
Like those, I mean, a 10-minute difference. That's incredibly insignificant. So it's not that this movie is too long. It's this movie feels too long, and that is your problem. And I know that's a much less tangible, like easily solvable problem, but your movie should never feel too long. It should feel like I don't want it to end. That's how it should feel. Or it should feel like I can't wait to see what happens next, or I'm really satisfied with how much time we spent with that, or, oh, this feels like a natural ending. Oh, wow, how exciting. And instead it was just like, this movie is long. And that was a little frustrating.
And my point here is not to like armchair quarterback the adaptation work here, or the choices or whatever Warner Brothers limitations were put upon the team. But it's strange because the more I read of these books, Messiah and Children of Dune are not divided into books.
Okay.
It's just the first one.
So he really had it all wonderfully laid out.
It's just tough.
Yeah.
It's different because like when I'm reading Children of Dune, I guess I'm just going to read the whole book and then we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of stuff to talk about.
It is, yeah.
And there was something very clean to me about the first Dune book. We're accustomed in genre fiction to trilogies. We like that.
We do love a trilogy.
We started as a Lord of the Rings podcast. We like trilogies.
Even though it's technically not a trilogy, but whatever. Yeah.
And I thought this, if you take the first book as a trilogy, which you can, in the same way I've got one book version of all Lord of the Rings right next to each other on my shelf, I think there's something extremely rewarding and challenging and bold about the first Dune story as a trilogy. We talked about that in our episode that's going to come out for book 3. And I don't know if that's what I can point to for the reason that some of these things didn't hit the way I wanted them to. I don't know if it's the handling of the side characters, the lack of texture in some of those major players. I don't know what it is. I loved the movie, but it didn't hit the way I wanted it to.
Right. And it also feels strange for me to be recommending more movies because usually I'm very like anti-sequel, like anti, like, you know, the
franchise.
Weird, like franchise, right? The breaking up of all of the finales that swept the early 2010s. Like, you know, why did Breaking Dawn need 2 parts? Okay, why did Mockingjay need 2 movies? I mean, I know why.
So the styrofoam cup of blood could explode is the cliffhanger.
Oh, yes, of course. Like, you know, like I hate that like money grab, milk it as much as you can. I really don't like that way of doing things. I like efficiency and but like ultimately what I like is honoring a story. And I really think that this one book needed 3 movies. I think that's That's sort of where I've landed.
Because there's such passion in this adaptation. You can tell they want to do justice. It's like the friend who's excited and has so much they want to tell you and show you about this new thing.
Yeah,
and
right.
that passion is infectious.
And it feels like we don't have enough time to talk about it. It's like, oh, I have to be somewhere, or the restaurant we're at is closing or something, and we don't have time to finish having this conversation.
This is a luxury problem.
Yeah, right.
It's a compliment.
Yeah.
Or at least that's how I mean it.
Yeah, me too.
But yeah, that's basically what I have to say about Dune Part 2. I really enjoyed it.
I did too.
I'm looking forward to seeing it again and seeing how my thoughts sort of mature.
I'm also wondering how much bias I had, like, because we saw it in IMAX. We're seeing it in just a normal theater tomorrow. I mean, like, normal theater.
Put on a seatbelt.
but yeah, I'm wondering how different it feels,
Yeah.
and I'm also just wondering, like, maybe I'm in a different mood that day, and maybe it hits differently. Maybe the movie actually feels even longer the second time, or maybe it feels perfectly paced the second time. I don't know, but I'm excited to keep looking at it and thinking about it and engaging with it.
I have loved just losing myself in the world of Dune for this month.
It's been pretty fun.
We did episodes about the first 2 parts of the first book. We have an episode locked and loaded for part 3, Prophet, which is the finale of the first book.
Yep.
We've already recorded the Messiah episode, and next Tuesday over on our Patreon,
I was gonna say, are we gonna
haven't
reveal
recorded
it?
it yet. We are going to do an episode on the 1984, I think, David Lynch Dune adaptation.
I'm very excited. Neither of us have seen that before.
That's going to be so much fun.
It's going to be great.
I know he's putting in some of the weird stuff that Villeneuve couldn't, but
yeah, I'm
doing
curious
Dune
to
all month
see
long.
what that's like. So check out, tune in for that. Our Patreon is patreon.com/secondbreakfastpod. It's also in the description of this episode. You get access to a bonus episode every month. So that's what we're doing for the month of March. But we've done other ones in the past. So you'll get access to that whole back catalog of all of our bonus episodes. The true crime thing you're talking about, I think was actually a column that I wrote for the Substack, but it's on our Patreon, right?
Yeah.
We started with a Substack and we transitioned to Patreon about 6 months ago.
We also talked about Godzilla -1 color last time. We have a
Right.
breakfast buffet series where we talk about like 6 or 7 different works of art in the same roundup discussion. Tons of content over there to support the show. And every Friday we talk about a Game of Thrones chapter.
If you like us talking about books, we talk about Game of Thrones every Friday. We read a chapter, we talk about it. So that's
we also
over
went
there.
through all of The Witcher and all of Lord of the Rings. So
Right.
the content is never ending.
It abounds. If you're on YouTube, please leave us a comment down below. Tell us what you thought of the movie. Tell us what you think about anything that we said, anything you'd like to add to the discussion, any questions you have.
Absolutely.
And we'd really love to know. Please don't spoil the books.
Or just mark it
or
as a
mark
spoiler.
it as a spoiler. Maybe do that. Just mark spoilers. Be respectful, And I think that's everything.
That's everything. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for watching. Go see this movie on the biggest screen you can. It is an amazing time. It's the most beautiful, overwhelming, gratifying, life-affirming, dazzling, brand new thing we're gonna have in cinemas this year.
But do
Stunning.
watch the first movie before you go, so you're not trying to live like that guy who sat next to Cam.
And if that's what I said about the second one, and I think the first one's better, what does that say about the first one?
Honestly,
so it's a wonderful time to be alive.
It sure is. It really is.
All right, that's it from us. We'll be back here on Friday with a brand new episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.